This took place when I was a teenager. Me and my best friend at the time, Ethan, used to be horror buffs, and we would deliberately do creepy things trying to get anything paranormal to occur. We'd watch horror movies and videos from the dark web till 3 in the morning, and with the bewitching hour at its prime, we would secretly exit Ethan's parents' house in hopes of stirring up the spirit world. On most nights, nothing really happened, and instead we would run around the neighborhood, scaring ourselves and really having just a fun time being weird and stupid. But every so often, always when we least expected it to happen, truly terrifying stuff would occur. Some stuff scared us so much and so badly that we would be stuck unable to fall asleep, and we wouldn't fall asleep until exhaustion took us down after having been awake for more than 24 hours. One of these occasions, probably the scariest, revolved around a demon called Bagul. Me and Ethan were hanging out one night with our best friends Caleb and Jacob. We'd all settled down after playing video games, grabbing some food, and spending a full day of skateboarding and hanging out. As per usual, we decided it was time to find a movie for the night, and we started scrolling. Me and Ethan at this time had already been huge horror movie advocates, but Jacob and Caleb weren't the biggest fans. Regardless though, we somehow all came to the same conclusion that we should watch the movie Sinister. For us, at the ages of 13 and 14, that movie turned out to be one of the most fear-inducing, traumatizing movies the four of us had ever seen. With the concept of it being a demon called Bagul, who would possess children and make them murder their entire families, this movie was both gruesome and truly horrifying. One of the key points of the movie, though, was how when the kids would murder their families, they'd videotape the entire thing and watch and rewatch again their acts of manslaughter. To lighten the mood, as the movie was still playing, I thought a funny prank would be to record me and my friends secretly with my little trash keyboard phone. The footage, I knew, would be grainy and the audio quality would be distorted, since my phone was old and damaged and it had never been a great phone to begin with. The clip I recorded ended up being a moment where me and my friends were joking around and laughing, trying to make fun of the movie to make the mood a bit more lighthearted, since we had all been so quiet and tense up to that moment. When we had finally finished the movie, we decided to all hang out and stay up a little later that night, but I had my prank in store, and I was ready to unleash the horror. I forget exactly how we came into it, but all of us started showing pictures we had recently taken from our phones. Caleb and Jacob were showing hilarious pictures of clips they'd gotten from Snapchat, while Ethan was showing memes and weird stuff. Since I had the dumb phone at the time, all I could show were the pictures I'd recently taken, which was of pretty normal stuff like my dogs or cool-looking cars. With the perfect moment occurring, I started scrolling through and then feigned and acted my best possible scared reaction to seeing the low-quality footage of me and my friends. Every one of us went silent and watched the video clip over and over and over again, completely mesmerized and stunned by what I was showing. None of them had seen me when I'd gotten the footage, which just added to the unreal nature of it all. But on top of that, the clip I had recorded had been one of the scariest moments in the movie. Me and my friends in the clip, like I mentioned before, were joking around for a second before going completely silent. The movie then showed one of the most horrifying scenes of Bagul showing his face for one of the first times. My friends saw the video, and it was dead silent. We were tense. The room was silent, and every single creak and groan of the house or the wind outside had us darting looks around, making sure that no demon or beast was about to jump out at us. The intensity of the situation had grown a little too much, and at that moment, I decided to finally start laughing and tell my friends I'd been acting the entire time and I'd filmed the footage. My friends were rightfully angry and surprised and just astonished that I'd pulled off such an elaborate and well-played prank. I'd always been pretty good at acting, but this night marked one of my best performances for sure. After this night, Bagul in the movie Sinister became kind of a laughing point for me and my friends, something to joke about because of how that night had ended. I don't joke about Bagul anymore. Saying his name out loud fills me with fear and makes me anxiously paranoid. And that's all because after a few months, me and Ethan decided to go out on one of our adrenaline-driven, bewitching hour journeys. It was 3 a.m., and the neighborhood was incredibly dark, much darker than usual, due to the moon being half gone and the clouds covering what little light was left from the moon. The neighborhood me and Ethan lived in was once surrounded by woods so dense that even in the daytime, it was nearly impossible to see through them. That, combined with the fact that it was so dark out, created such a freaky atmosphere, which was one of the reasons we loved doing our night walks in our neighborhood. On this particular night, we hadn't really done anything scary. Every so often, we would watch some of the most disturbing content online right before we would go outside in hopes that we might get something to happen or see something occur. On this night, We just thought it would be fun to go hang out and explore some parts of the neighborhood we usually stayed away from. In our neighborhood was this one back entrance that had a huge curving hill that led right next to some of the most dense woods in the entire area. To say this turn was a blind curve when driving would have been an understatement, and I can only imagine how often people would have gotten into wrecks because of how dangerous it was. Our justification for walking on the edge of it when the road didn't have any sidewalks or areas for people to safely walk was that since it was so late in the night, no one would be driving. And that did turn out to be true. No one drove by to save us from our encounter with the demon we had so often joked about. No one would know about the experience, except for the two of us for many years to come, and only now at the age of 24 am I actually finally comfortable enough with sharing the story. Anyways, like I said before, the hill was curved at a very dangerous angle, and that's saying something considering we lived in the huge hills of Tennessee. Walking up and around the bend, the two of us became winded very quickly, and it was such a bad place to be winded. With either side of us encompassed by the incredibly thick woods on the left and an old creepy house on the right, we didn't feel comfortable stumbling up and taking so long to get past that section of the neighborhood. The entire hike up the hill, I felt incredibly unnerved, and the night that hadn't been so chilly before, all of a sudden felt numbing to the point where you could see your own breath just barely in the darkness. I suddenly felt like I was being watched as we got close to the very top and became incredibly paranoid, to the point that I had my head on a swivel, looking in every direction to make sure no one had been following us. Rather than a sense of fear, it felt like a sense of danger, and I was starting to wonder if me and Ethan might get jumped. I looked over to him and was about to suggest that we turn back, until I noticed that he was just as scared as I was. For some reason, the notion of turning back escaped my mind, and the two of us quietly stumbled forward, almost as if we weren't able to stop the ascent. The whole experience was just unearthly, and my gut was hurting from all the clenching and churning. We finally got to the top of the long, winding hill and decided to stop for a second, since the cold air made it pretty hard to breathe. I looked at Ethan, and he said the first thing he'd said in a while since we started this very long hike away from the parents' house. Ethan told me he needed to go pee. I nodded my head and looked away because this was a sort of a common thing for me and my guy friends, was to watch each other's backs when we had to take an emergency bathroom break. Ethan went to the bathroom on the opposite side of the street, facing the old creepy house, while I was stuck only a few feet away looking straight into the woods. I had already been so on edge because of that feeling of someone watching me, and staring into the woods only made it so much worse. As Ethan continued to do his business, my eyes rapidly began to dart around the woods, picking out any and every motion I could hardly see since the forest was so black. And that's when my breath stopped, and my heart froze. Standing in front of me was a man enshrouded by the dark. He stood very tall, taller than me at the time, which I was a pretty huge person myself, standing at 6'2". His hair was long and black and greasy, almost identical to the way that Bagul had looked in the movie. His shoulders were broad and menacing, and through the dark, I could just barely make out what seemed to be some sort of liquid, thick and dark, drenching his body and specks falling from his hair. But what terrified me the most was his face. With the backdrop of the pitch-black trees, his face stood out perfectly. It was completely pale, the color ashen white. His eyes were deep and blacker than the surrounding forest, completely empty pockets that looked too black to be real. I saw all this in a split moment before my instincts finally kicked in, and I screamed at the top of my lungs, which was something I'd never done before, even though Ethan and I had experienced incredibly traumatizing stuff before. As soon as I screamed, I sprinted away from the man, and with my sense of direction distorted and confused by the pure adrenaline, I sprinted further down the creepy road in the wrong direction. I took off, leaving Ethan behind as he frantically zipped up his pants. Sprinting further down the road, I kept screaming at the top of my lungs, "Bagul! Bagul! Ethan! Run!" A few seconds into my mad dash away, I heard Ethan scream back, "I see him." He started screaming as well, begging me to wait, but I kept going, my lungs on fire, and my instincts telling me not to stop no matter what happened. The two of us dead sprinted into the night until we finally reached an old lamppost flickering in the night and giving off an ominous orange light. As we stood, our hands on our knees trying to catch our breath, the two of us began to panic, realizing the mistake we had just made. How we had just run further away from our home rather than back towards it. I stood there wheezing and whimpering, on the verge of tears from how scary the experience was. Ethan and I took turns, after a few minutes had gone by, describing the features of Bagul we had just seen, and his description completely matched my own. This was a common practice for us when we had paranormal experiences, to make sure that we had both seen the same thing. We didn't know what to do, stranded in the middle of the woods, with the only sense of comfort being a dimly lit, ominous yellow light lamppost. I'm not sure how long the two of us stood there. We began to become fully numb, stuck in place in the freezing temperatures, too scared to move, and even more scared to talk. The realization had come that we couldn't call Ethan's parents because we knew we'd get in trouble for doing our stupid secret night walks, and we were scared that his parents would forbid us from doing them in future nights. The only option we had was to walk by that same spot. The spot where a demon had silently been watching us while we walked about oblivious to its presence. Maybe 30 minutes passed, and the cold was starting to get to us. We decided it was time to go home because the cold was too much, and there wasn't any way we could survive out in almost below freezing temperatures without the warmth of a home. There were serious risks at hand, and we didn't want to get frostbite. So, we started approaching the spot, slowly, cautiously, and as apprehensive as ever. When we got within 20 feet of where Bagul had been standing, we ran so fast that our feet was probably not even touching the floor. We made it past without anything happening, too scared to even look and see if Bagul was still standing there, and we booked it to Ethan's house, not stopping to take a breath, despite the distance being over a mile or so away. That moment, when we finally got home, was a moment of pure bliss and relief. Though we didn't dare fall asleep and continued to stay up long until the next morning of the day, we finally felt a little at ease, knowing that our near-death experience was over. Many years passed by, Ethan and I never disclosing the story to anyone, and I'm not entirely sure why. I think part of it was that we never really thought people would believe us, and I think we knew it was better left unspoken to just not be thought of anymore. Times would come when we would eventually get brave enough to revisit this spot, though nothing ever happened after the first incident. I even took my girlfriend with me late in the night to that same spot, and while she became quickly paranoid at the exact spot me and Ethan had seen him, without me letting her know where it had happened, nothing else ever came close to what me and Ethan saw on that fateful night. That's my story of Bagul. And my one message I have for anyone after witnessing that is to not mess around with the spiritual realm. It's real and active and terrifying, doesn't come close to describing how otherworldly and freaky it is. I have some more stories from mine and Ethan's experiences I'll eventually share. But as of right now, that's still one of the scariest experiences of my life. My name is Michael Ambrosio, and I've decided to share another story from my friend Ethan and my experiences together. This is a bit of a shorter story, but it revolves around us doing these late nighttime walks at 3 in the morning around the bewitching hour. On this particular night, me and Ethan had just watched a horror movie, though I can't remember for the life of me what the movie was called, and I'm too lazy to look it up. Anyways, it was a movie about the paranormal, and there was this one scene where a woman had just been trapped in an incredibly creepy basement. She was being chased around and having violent and horrendous encounters with the spiritual world, and somehow, she'd ended up being trapped with only a candle in a basement so dark you could only see slightly the shape of her face through the flicker of the little wick. Her face was horror-stricken as she looked to the left at something off camera in the movie set. Then, 2 little kids' hands came out on the right side of her as a voice whispered, "Lights out," before the hands clapped and extinguished her only source of light, leaving her screaming her lungs out as the scene became just a pitch-black screen. It was by far one of the scariest scenes of the entire movie, and me and Ethan loved how the whole thing played out so much that on this particular night, we decided it would be fun to quote the movie and try and get something creepy to happen for us. We were walking down our neighborhood street, right next to the house on this really large hill, and lining the entire right side of the descending slope were these dimly lit light posts, so anyone who had to do late night drives could have a better chance at navigating the hilly roads we lived on. Ethan and I were talking nonstop about all the coolest scenes, obsessed with how the movie had ended. Which is funny because now that I'm writing this so many years later, I can't really remember how it ended. I only remember the lights out scene. And that's because of this night. While the memory now is slightly foggy, I remember the 2 of us having walked about a quarter of a mile away from Ethan's parents' house. We were walking next to a house that used to scare us pretty bad, because the person who had previously lived there, before newer neighbors had moved in, had sadly ended his own life in that house. Because of that, the area of the neighborhood had always been more eerie than the rest. Anyways, we were walking by that house, and the mood was actually chipper. Until Ethan jokingly looks at me, with a devious smile in his eyes, and he whispers, "Lights out," while clapping, imitating the scene we'd just seen. Immediately, every single lamppost simultaneously went out at the clapping of his hands. These lampposts stayed on until usually 6 or 7 a.m., when the light from the sun had finally shone down on our part of the neighborhood, and it was right around the bewitching hour. Ethan's devious smile quickly turned serious and frightened, and the silence that followed the lights going out was unearthly and eerie to the umpth degree. We couldn't hear any insects anymore, or birds, or the hum of the lamps nearby, and it almost felt as if it got colder. Ethan and I sprinted after a moment of silence, all the way back to his parents' house, not daring to look behind us because of fear what might be there. We didn't stop until we reached his house, and we were safe. Though it's a bit of a shorter story, this is just one of my many paranormal experiences he and me went through on our nighttime walks. One last super short story I have of me and Ethan. Do you guys remember when the clown incidents were a thing, where someone would dress up as a clown and chase people around, and the videos were going crazy viral? Around that time, Ethan's parents strictly forbid me and him from going on our late night walks because of fear from the crazy clown people. We went out one night and snuck out, looking to see if we could find anything weird, and at one point, and where the woods are the deepest, I swear we heard this deep, booming clown laugh. I'm not sure what else happened because this memory is just so foggy, but it was kind of weird and spooky for sure.